All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And welcome to our 7th installment of the ORCID US Community Showcase webinar series. I'm Sheila Raven. I'm the program leader for persistent identifier communities at Lyrasis, and that includes our ORCID US community and the Lyrasis DataSite US community. So before we get started, I'm just going to cover a few logistics. You will find that your microphone and video have been disabled for this session, but you can certainly use the chat to chat with me and any of the co-hosts that are listed, and these are our presenters for today. And you should see on your Zoom screen that you have the ability to turn on automatically transcribed captions. So please feel free to use that feature on your screen if it's helpful. And this session is being recorded and will be made available to everyone on our public YouTube channel afterwards. So please keep an eye out for that link after the session, and note that closed captions will be included on that recording. So here's an agenda of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start us off by giving a brief overview of ORCID and the ORCID US community. And then we'll hear from my colleague Paloma Araiza at ORCID with a brief global overview of ORCID adoption worldwide. And then we'll hear from our featured panelists, and they're each going to give a case study on how ORCID is being used at their organization. So many thanks to our presenters. We're going to have Christina Miski at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Bonnie Crotty Nelson at the Research Triangle Institute, and we'll hear from Tom Pollard and Brian Gao from the PhysioNet team at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. And then we'll wrap up with discussion and questions at the end. So to get started and make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to just give a brief overview of ORCID and the ORCID US community, just in case you might need a refresher. ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. And an ORCID ID is a unique persistent identifier that distinguishes individuals from each other. And so an ORCID ID is formatted as a URI and links back to an ORCID record that can contain information about the individual's activities and affiliations. So employment, education, works, funding, other biographical details, contributions, and activities. This is an example from my ORCID record, seeing my ORCID ID at the top, my unique 16-digit number there, and then my ORCID record has a biography that I added and a number of other pieces of information similar to a CV. But ORCID, it really helps with name disambiguation. And also serves as kind of a central place to store information about your activities and works and other affiliations as a researcher. But ORCID is more than just name disambiguation. So the ORCID registry and infrastructure provides a mechanism for interoperability between systems and workflows in the scholarly communication ecosystem that require data about individuals and their affiliations and contributions. So ORCID IDs are increasingly being used in funding, publishing, and research reporting workflows, not only to distinguish individuals from each other, but also as a time-saving approach, enabling the transfer of data across the research and scholarly communication landscape. So in this graphic, you're seeing the researcher at the center with their ORCID ID, and then through the ORCID API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, the researcher is able to connect with their employer, connect with their funder, and connect with their publisher, and transfer all of the information stored in their ORCID record to these organizations that they're affiliated with. So the ORCID API, like I mentioned, allows organizations to read data from and write data to their affiliated researchers' ORCID records with the permission of the researcher. And so this helps to reduce administrative burden in application and reporting processes and contributes to the integrity of the metadata in this ecosystem. So you can think of ORCID and the ORCID API like a central hub that researchers can use to store and share information about their affiliations and activities with the organizations they work with. And then organizations can add information to individuals' ORCID records so that the information is authoritative. Now, because ORCID is structured like an ecosystem, all stakeholders need to be involved in order for everyone to get the most benefit. So for most institutions, and that includes universities and other research institutions, there are 3 equally important components needed to help both the institution and individual researchers benefit from ORCID. And those are gaining internal stakeholder support to prioritize ORCID adoption, integrating the ORCID API with local systems, so technical integration, and then doing some outreach and education to researchers about ORCID so that they will get and use their ORCID IDs. And this is especially crucial because researchers are central to the ORCID system. So in the United States, we have a national ORCID consortium for research institutions called the ORCID US Community. And this consortium was formed in January of 2018 when Lyrasis, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the Northeast Research Libraries, and the Greater Western Library Alliance all joined forces to form a national partnership for ORCID membership. So Lyrasis is serving as the administrative home for this consortium. And we're also now partnering with the Health Research Alliance, which is a group of nonprofit health research funders in the US. Our main goals are to provide support for a community of practice around ORCID in the US, enabling member institutions to share experience and insight with each other, and basically try to make it as easy as possible for institutions to adopt ORCID, and make sure that institutions get the most value from their ORCID membership. We currently have actually 171. We just had a new member join yesterday. So we have 171 members in the ORCID US community. And this map just kind of gives you an idea of where our members are all located. And it's mostly universities, but we also have some research institutes, health and hospital systems, and of course, some health research funders. We also have societies. Really, any nonprofit organization in the US can join our group. And if your organization is not yet a member of ORCID and you're interested in joining, please let us know. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Paloma to tell us a little bit more about the global view of ORCID membership and adoption.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sheila, for the introduction. And I'm going to explain maybe a bit more about the Americas region, particularly ORCID in the United States. These data are from January. So the members in the US are now a bit higher, and also the number of members in the US Community Consortium, as Sheila said, is now 171. Those are divided, I'm speaking now of the whole United States, on 172 research institutions, 33 publishers, 29 associations, 26 government or federal agencies, 13 services and technology providers, and 8 funders. And at the moment, we have 365 active ORCID integrations, institutions that have connected with the ORCID system. So this also gives an overview of the different stakeholders at ORCID. Next slide, Sheila, please. And if we go to the complete Americas region, we see a growth here Actually, not only in the US, where we have 2 consortia, and Canada, where we have 1, but there is also a consortium in Brazil, together with some direct members. We have another consortium in Colombia with 23 integrations, actually most of them with the OGS system, Open Journal System, and the affiliation manager. And we have some direct members in Chile, Peru, Mexico, and now also in Central America, in El Salvador and Panama. And next slide, Sheila, please. And if we go to the global picture, this has slightly changed in this past month, because we have our first member in Russia after several negotiations with Russia and with the ministry there. And we have a total of 13.5 million registered ORCID IDs, over 1,200 members in 55 countries now, 24 consortia, and over 1,100 integrations. And 627 of them are updating records regularly, so are actually active integrations, and 19 certified service providers, and this number is growing as well. And at the end, we have over 85 million works and 13 million affiliations added to ORCID. I have to say that only 2% of these 13 million affiliations are added by members, but we are expecting this to change also with the use of the affiliation manager, which has 2 very nice use cases in the US Community Consortium, Baylor University, and also the University of Georgia. And that would be it from my end. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paloma. So now we're going to switch over and hear from our guest speakers. First up will be Christina Miskey at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Christina, I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your screen.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, awesome. So hi, everybody. As Sheila said, I'm Christina Miskey, the Scholarly Communication Librarian for Research Infrastructure at UNLV. My position is currently responsible for managing our ORCID membership, leading outreach and education efforts on campus, and collaborating with our campus partners on current and future API integrations on campus. So at UNLV, we are currently focused on providing support and education to campus researchers about the benefits and uses of ORCID in their research and in their careers. UNLV was granted R1 status in 2018, and since then has prioritized efforts to help researchers get to the next level of their research. So far, this has included creating new positions within the libraries to provide that support, collaborating with campus offices and other stakeholders to provide outreach and education, and working to set up grad students for their future careers. Since I started in my position in 2020, ORCID has been a critical part of this overall effort. So before I jump into our outreach efforts and successes, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit with some of the challenges that we've encountered. Prior to 2020, we had some staffing support for ORCID on campus, but those dedicated staff members were either on temporary contracts or left the university. Additionally, one of the primary supporters for ORCID on campus was our Vice Provost of Research, who also left their position in 2019 and was only very recently replaced. So these staffing changes meant that we essentially had to kind of start over. In 2020, I met with library staff and staff in campus offices to obtain a variety of perspectives about ORCID on campus. I reviewed all of our old documentation and outreach materials, and then set about the task of creating new materials and updating all of our outdated ones. I also began to kind of test the waters with a new outreach program that I'll go into more detail in a couple of slides. And all of this had to occur during the tumultuous period of the first 6 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can probably imagine how difficult it was to build those relationships and garner interest in any new things when everyone was overwhelmed with the uncertainty and everything. So that was definitely a big challenge. But fortunately, there were some foundations besides old documentation that I could work with. Our campus implemented Faculty 180 in 2019, and the ORCID integration was included with that adoption, which meant that I just needed to connect with staff in our Office of Faculty Affairs and help update their documentation and find ways to inform and educate our faculty on why, how, and when to use this integration. I also created information about existing compatibilities with databases that we subscribe to, such as Dimensions, to help faculty get the most out of our existing resources. And our Office of Sponsored Programs subscribes to Pivot, so I also began working with them to create better information for faculty about using ORCID and Pivot together to search for grant funding opportunities. And briefly, we are also working on planning future integrations, which are very much in the beginning stages. We would like to expand what integrations we have on campus, such as to our institutional repository, additional integrations with our Office of Sponsored Programs, and we are exploring how our campus's adoption of academic analytics can work with the ORCID API in the future. So, since all of our recent outreach has occurred digitally by necessity, we've been really limited in what we can pursue. But I've tried to be as creative as possible in finding new ways for faculty and students to engage with ORCID. I've outlined what we've accomplished so far on this slide so that you can look at some of our resources, which includes update to digital resources like I mentioned earlier. I've also developed a variety of workshops for faculty and students to help them see how ORCID can make their lives easier. Examples include a Getting Started with ORCID workshop that was designed for grad students, where I walked them through creating an ORCID account and adding things to their profile for the first time. Identifying external grant funding opportunities for faculty that shows them how ORCID can be incorporated into their search for grant funding. And finally, we've tried to incorporate ORCID into outreach materials hosted by other campus offices, such as a weekly newsletter for the Office of Sponsored Programs, attending training sessions with the Office of Faculty Affairs, and working with our grad college. We've also tried to incorporate this into library-sponsored events, such as our recent Research Impact Challenge, which resulted in nearly 40 new IDs being created on the same day, and encouraged faculty to update their existing ORCID records and connect to Faculty 180 and use our existing integration. And each year during annual review season for faculty, which we just wrapped up here at UNLV, I also sent out information about ORCID and Faculty 180 and encouraged faculty to reach out for help if they need it. Our outreach efforts over the past 2 years have been fairly successful. We currently have over 2,200 users registered with the UNLV domain. About 44% of these are grad students, which we can tell by the type of domain that they used, because students have a different email domain than staff. Since April 2020, almost 1,000 new users have created IDs, which is an increase over previous years. Our ORCID at UNLV LibGuide has had over 1,500 visitors in the past year and a half, with 73% of these being new visitors, since I made new content and update to the structure of the guide in early 2020. And finally, we've had more users interacting with our Faculty 180 integration, which you can see reflected on the graph on the lower right corner of this slide. Each spike that you see on the graph in IDs first connected coincides with an outreach event, such as a workshop, training, or other event. The large spike in the middle of the chart is from our Research Impact Challenge. So that was a big success. And finally, these are some of the important lessons that I've learned over the past couple of years attempting various types of outreach and building relationships within the libraries and on campus. I found that faculty tend to be more interested in learning about ORCID if it's combined with another topic that they're interested in. I've had more success with generating interest and engagement when I take this approach versus a straightforward approach specifically discussing ORCID. I've also found that our subject liaison librarians often have good insight into faculty and student attitudes in their subject areas and can offer useful feedback to improve materials or the approaches that I try to take. I've found that if I incorporate their feedback into my work and involve them in the process of creating outreach materials or developing new things, then they're more likely to work with me in helping to reach faculty and make connections in areas that they already have an in. Liaisons also have a lot on their plates, so sharing information with them annually or each semester helps them keep track of what you want them to share with faculty and students. I've also sought input from campus offices that I work with on a regular basis, and this has helped me to build stronger relationships with the staff that I speak with. This has made coordinating events, developing new materials, and workshops a lot easier. And I found that the staff members in these areas generally like being showcased as a part of library events, kind of like a quid pro quo, where I help them advertise their work and then they help me advertise mine. And so with that, I'll be around for questions if you have questions, but you can also reach out to me. I'm happy to exchange emails, set up a time to chat, and everything. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. And yes, everyone, please stick around because we'll do Q&A with all of our presenters at the end. So next up, we're going to hear from Bonnie Nelson at the Research Triangle Institute. Bonnie, do you want to go ahead and... Bonnie, are you there? Oh. Okay, Bonnie, you should be able to unmute.
There we go. I was clicking and clicking to no avail. Let me share my screen. Share and share. Hopefully everybody can see it. Okay, there we go. So thank you, Sheila, for letting us highlight this. I was glad to see that I'm touching on all three of your points for effective integration. And much the same as Christina's presentation, you'll see a lot of the same themes reflected in this. I'm going to talk a little bit about RTI and then about the campaign. And then I think what makes our particular integration unique is that we're using a pure integration from an Elsevier product. So I'll touch on that as well. A little bit about RTI. We're a research institute, not a university. So that's a little bit different. It means we have some good carrots and some, ways to incentivize people. And we really want to get our research out there, and using ORCID to do that fit well within our mission. This is us at a glance. We have most of our work is contract work, and so we're sensitive to the needs of the clients. And so when there is a requirement from the client for an ORCID ID, that's important that we want to be able to fill that. Same with our publishing. The publishers require an ORCID ID. We want our researchers to have that readily done and at hand when it's required. So when we started out building our ORCID campaign, as Christina said, COVID was an issue. We had already been using ORCID IDs for some of our researchers. We were incorporating them in some of our integrations. We have an in-house scholarly press. They were requiring it or requesting it from their researchers. And so we wanted to know what our value proposition, why would we want to make this an institute-wide campaign? We recognize a growing need. what ORCID would bring to the table for our researchers. We are working on a multi-year project to build persistent identifiers into the research cycle of our documents in the Institute. And as I said, we have this peer metadata repository that lets us track the research output of our researchers as well as their ORCID adoption. And so we were able to leverage that capability that already existed. So we started to a presentation to senior management saying that we would like to start this project. They were on board with it. We shared why we thought it was important, what it was going to bring to the Institute, and put RTI to the cutting edge for the information. We had some things lined up, such as, giveaways and in the cafeteria and tabling. And then of course, COVID hit. And so we had to pivot, as Christina said, to an online campaign. And so lots and lots of information went out. We had emails and drawings and article after article about it. We started off with a baseline of only about 12% of the researchers having ORCID ID linked in our Pure. And so Pure, as I said, is our metadata repository, and it allows us, a researcher, to put their ORCID ID with their profile. And so we can track through our published authors how many have an ORCID ID. And we set a target for the end of the year of 2020 to have 50% of those authors a link to ORCID ID. And we knew there were lots of authors, researchers with ORCID IDs out there. We just didn't have a way to track them or have them in our systems. And so, as Sheila said, we focused on awareness, communication, and training, and it was fairly successful. We worked with a lot of other institutes. We did a lot of reporting. Our business units are very competitive, and so we provided them with percentages tables showing how they were doing in relation to the other business units, and that would spur a little bump when that information went out for people to add their ORCID ID. We ended up by the end of this 2021 year with a 68% adoption, which we were really thrilled about. We think we can do a little bit better. We were hoping for 80% is where we're sort of targeting. But slowly, as we've integrated it into our standard procedures, it helps us grow it each time. So I wanted to focus on the Pure integration. What Pure allows us to do is track those integrations, provide notifications to the researchers. We auto-populate their ORCID profiles with their research information that is stored in our Pure system. So all of their peer-reviewed publications, their conferences, their technical reports can all feed over to their ORCID profile. It's a single place where they can maintain that information. The staff in the library actually populates their Pure records with all of their indexed peer-reviewed journal articles out of Web of Science and PubMed. And so they don't have to enter any of that themselves. It goes into our Pure instance and then exported over to their ORCID profile. All of the information is validated and curated before going over to ORCID. So we know that the information that's being seen publicly is clean and correct, which sometimes, especially early with ORCID, that was a little harder to do. It provides clickable links on our Pure profiles. As you can see there, Anna, who's on the call, she has her ORCID profile. It's a clickable link. It shows up in lots of our different systems. So for example, on our rti.org website, the external website, the ORCID IDs can be published there as well. And again, a clickable link to expand their research impact. Let's see, what do I have to say about it? So it's actually very fast. This is kind of a cluttered slide, but it is basically 10 steps from going into our Pure system, clicking on their profile, connecting, saying they want to create or connect it from Pure to ORCID. We're basically being authenticated as a trusted institution, and through ORCID is so wonderful about being able to have security at all different levels and places. And so as an authorized institution, trusted institution, we're being allowed to export information from our system into their ORCID profile. Even if they have to create an ORCID profile in this step, it is merely one additional step, and then it's authorized and they are connected. This is an example of what it looks like when it goes over from Pure into ORCID. It puts in their employment information. It adds those records, they're highlighted there. the researchers, if they already have that information coming in from another source or have added it manually, it will be in that stacked card process that ORCID has, and they have to choose the preferred source. So they can say which one they want at one point, and then that'll apply to all of them, or they can do it on each individual record. It's interesting sometimes because there's a little bit of confusion sometimes with the notifications. If we make a change and they get a notification from ORCID, but it's actually related to a change that we've made in Pure, sometimes there's a little confusion there. And ORCID keeps opening up new fields that can be populated via the API. And so it's a little bit of a challenge to keep my Pure up to date and get Elsevier notified about these changes so that they can send that information across. But we do have all that information captured, and when the connection is built, we'll be able to send additional information over as well, besides just the publication information that we're currently sending. So it's been really successful. People have been very happy. As Christina mentioned, we try and bundle what we do with other things. So we have regular training about our Pure metadata repository for the staff. And so we have now incorporated either obtaining or linking and obtaining the ORCID ID with that training. So every new person that gets a Pure account, also at that time, will get an ORCID account as part of the training and link those two together. We have it built into our other requirements in the system with the author awards that we offer in-house. As I mentioned, RTI Press, the in-house scholarly publishing arm, asks for that from their authors. Other things that we're doing is trying to look for new places where it's needed, because as I said, we're being driven by the requirements of our clients. So the recent White House memo wanting, highly recommending, strongly recommending that the agencies have the PIs have an ORCID, a unique identifier, which ORCID is the only one that really qualifies. We're now to the point where we have other units or other staff in the Institute coming to us with ways where ORCID can be identified into different things that they're doing. We occasionally provide some incentives on a regular basis, a drawing type of thing for people that add theirs that had an account in Pure but didn't have their ORCID linked. And we've had some really good success. One of the really nice thing that happened really early in the campaign is this quote that I have here. I had a researcher write to me and say she was co-publishing with someone from a government agency, and the publisher was requiring ORCID, and her co-author had no idea what it was or how to get it. And so she was able to walk them through getting an ORCID ID and entering it into their publication they were submitting. And so she looked really good, which makes us look really good. And we really appreciated that information. All of the business units, as you saw, are heavily vested in having a high percentage of their published authors. So, so we've had good adoption for the training that we've done. And I'm trying to think. I think that's about it. So thank you very much. There's a picture of our campus where we will someday return. And thank you, Sheila, for letting me tell about our integration.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bonnie. All right, so let's go to our final presentation. Brian and Tom, if you want to share your screen and unmute.
Sure, I'll do that. And then Tom can. Can you see the slides?
Yep, looks
Yes.
good.
Okay.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Tom Pollard. I'm a research scientist at MIT and a director of a platform called PhysioNet. I'm here with Brian Gao, who is also a research scientist at MIT, and he kind of led the integration of PhysioNet with ORCID. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this today, Sheila. I also want to give a shout out to Amy Nernberger, who leads the data science team at MIT Libraries. She gave us a huge amount of support in doing this. So just as an overview of our presentation, I'll talk briefly about PhysioNet, and then I'm going to hand over to Brian. And he's going to talk about his work in actually kind of integrating PhysioNet with ORCID, and then talk about some opportunities for collaboration. So PhysioNet, I imagine this is new to many of you. PhysioNet is a fair repository of clinical data and software. So we're working hard to make data software findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Data and software on PhysioNet is very widely used in research, education, and industry. We have data sets that are used for kind of active research projects around the world, for teaching in university courses and high school courses, and in industry in things like development of medical devices. PhysioNet was established in 1999 through funding from the NIH. We completely rebuilt the platform in 2019, end of 2019, to follow the FAIR principles, and we now have just over 42,000 active registered users, so people kind of using our data and software and registered in the system. Because we're working with clinical data, often the data is very sensitive. Some of our data sets are open access, but other data sets, for example, maybe an example of a chest X-ray data set with annotations, with reports, handwritten reports that are describing these images are very sensitive. They're de-identified, but still, we need to treat them carefully. So we require users who want to access these data sets to be credentialed. And what credentialing means is that we're checking the identity of the users. We require the user to do a course, a free online course in human research, and then submit a formal application to us. We now receive around 350 applications per week, which is getting pretty overwhelming for us. And we're kind of, a big part of our effort has been trying to streamline the process. But yeah, so that's the credentialing process, and this idea of sensitive data on PhysioNet. And that kind of leads on to the next slide, which is, why is ORCID important for us? I think, perhaps our first use case is a bit unusual in that we want to be able to establish the identity of users and have some indication of the research background of users who are applying for credentialed access to sensitive data. And so for us, having ORCID linked to accounts is a very helpful thing.
But I couldn't tell.
And also, we want people to treat data and software as primary research outputs. We want data and software to be thought of as important as traditional research articles. And so we want to start feeding details of data sets and software that we publish back to ORCID. And now I'm going to hand over to Brian, who's going to talk about the hard work that he did in integrating PhysioNet with ORCID.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I joined PhysioNet in December of 2020 and was kind of tasked with this project where we wanted to link a PhysioNet user's account to their ORCID account and store that information. It was a bit intimidating. I was just trying to get my head around our platform, and then had to start working on this integration. But the documentation and support we received from ORCID was phenomenal. It made it very, very, very helpful. I learned a lot, and it was definitely a good experience. So we finished that in February 2021. You can see eventually we had a news announcement on our site for that. And it was nice because there was essentially an immediate benefit to the platform, where these credentialing applications that take a decent bit of time to process, especially when you can't uncover information about the person applying, were becoming more efficient. And that has continued, thanks partially to ORCID. So most people probably decide to link their PhysioNet account to the ORCID account when they see this page, when they go to apply to use our sensitive data, where we tell them that if they link this to their user account to ORCID, that it may expedite their application, since it'll be easier for us to identify them. So that's probably where most people are doing this, though. When new users sign up, they also see this kind of section for ORCID to input their information or link to their ORCID. So this is what that section looks like. At first, of course, they won't have an actual ORCID link to their PhysioNet account. But if they click that blue link ORCID button, it'll send them through the ORCID API. And once they successfully log in, it'll return their unique ORCID ID, which we'll store in our database. And this kind of took off right away. The blue line shows the monthly links that we're getting, and the orange, the cumulative. The first and last dot on the blue line are incomplete months. So you can see that in general, we're getting around 150 users per month linking their PhysioNet account to their ORCID account. And in total, across the year that we've had this out, there's been over 2,000 people who have linked. So people are definitely using it. And to give you a little more understanding about what this application looks like. So when people apply to use our sensitive data, they fill out some information about themselves and also tell us a little bit about the research they want to do. And they have to provide a reference usually. And if the reference or the person applying are at an email address that we recognize and we hear back from the reference, then it gives us a lot of confidence. But either way, we like to know a little bit more about the research background of the applicant and the reference. So both of them can link to their ORCID account. And if they do, right in the application itself, the people who are reviewing this application can click the link, and that will send us to ORCID. And you'll see the research works for the applicant or the reference. And typically we'll see something where the source is generally the applicant themselves. And that's totally fine. We still appreciate this kind of overview of their work, regardless of how that got populated in the ORCID. But if the source is actually the publisher, then we really gain a lot of confidence that this is the person who did this research, and that they're probably doing an extension of that research with our data. So that's a really nice feature when it does happen. And so that's pretty much how we're using ORCID now. The next thing we really are excited about is being able to take data sets that are published on PhysioNet and push that information directly to the author's ORCID accounts. You can see in this citation at the top, this is a data project that I've published on PhysioNet, which has an associated DOI. And I can add that to my ORCID, which I've done manually here. And that's great. We're really excited that ORCID recognizes these data publications. But again, we want to do our part. We want to be able to push this directly, not only to make it easier for the users, so they don't have to enter it manually, but also to make it an official thing, just like we appreciate when the source is a journal. So that's kind of our next plan with our ORCID integration. Hopefully we'll be able to get to that sooner than later. And yeah, we just wanted to say, our code is all fully open source. That includes the ORCID integration, all our credentialing, how we handle all these data projects. It's all fully open source. So if anyone out there is interested in collaborating with us, we'd be happy to do that. We've been working and supporting the University of Toronto, who's just received a large grant for AI in medicine. In this capacity, they're using the PhysioNet platform. They'll also be using ORCID to bring this platform to be. So I think that's it for us. I'll send it back to Sheila.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian and Tom. So we just heard 3 case studies, one from a university, one from a research institute, and one from a program at a university. So kind of 3 different but also similar perspectives. At this time, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. You can either send your question to me, Sheila Rabin. You'll also see that you can send a question directly to any of the presenters, So please take a minute to think about any questions that you might have and put those into the chat. And while everyone is thinking, I did get a question a little bit earlier asking whether the ORCID API is bidirectional. And the question was specifically about Pure, which does have a bidirectional functionality. So you can push data from Pure to ORCID, and you can also bring data from ORCID into Pure. And there are a number of different vendor systems and other types of systems that have the ORCID API built in like that. But each system is a little bit different depending on how the ORCID API integration was set up. So some systems just allow you to pull data in from ORCID, or some systems just allow you to write data to ORCID. So it really depends on what platforms you might be using. So I'm going to share a link in the chat here, and this will take you to a web page where we have a list of common systems, common platforms that many organizations are using, and it will tell you what the status is, what the ORCID status is for each of those systems. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that.
Sheila, I
Yes.
was going to say for the Pure integration, we're not importing data in. However, it is captured in a import section of our Pure. So it's there. Since our records already exist, we'd have to merge the two together, and we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. However, on all of our peer-reviewed publications that do have an ORCID ID identified author, their author ORCID IDs are associated with that record as well. So we now have a peer-reviewed publication reference that has all of the authors' ORCID IDs attached to it if they were available to us.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Bonnie.
Sheila?
Yes, go ahead.
I got a question directly.
Okay.
So Deborah asked me if I can elaborate on UNLV's integrations with Dimensions and Pivot, and whether we're using the paid or paid version of Dimensions. So we do have a paid subscription to Dimensions. The Dimensions system database works with ORCID where it writes grants to your ORCID account. And then Pivot, you can import your ORCID scholarship and your profile information to populate your profile with Pivot. And so how we use this with faculty is we use the two systems together, kind of like in a symbiotic relationship, if you want to say. So faculty could import their ORCID profiles to Pivot to get customized grant suggestions, and then go into the Dimensions database and kind of explore funding trends and things like that, and potential collaborators when they apply for grant funding. And that's how we use it with faculty.
Wonderful. Thanks, Christina. And I actually have a few more questions that have come in for you, Christina. The first one is, could you talk more about the Research Impact Challenge? What is it? And can you talk more about the impact on ORCID adoption?
Yeah, so this was our first Research Impact Challenge, and it was a 5-day challenge where faculty at UNLV could use different tools and resources to try and increase the impact of their research. So the first day of the challenge, faculty could either create a new ORCID account, or they could update their ORCID account or connect it to our existing integration. And so we had a lot of success with that on their first day. We had 38 faculty create new IDs on that day, which I think is a big success. And I got several questions from faculty asking for more information about updating their accounts and how they can get more active with their accounts and things like that. So I think it was a really big success.
That's wonderful. Yes. And I've heard from several different universities, especially, that have done this Research Impact Challenge. So there's a lot of different examples where you do one activity per day, and one of those activities is make sure your ORCID record is up to date, or what have you. And it kind of gets people excited. It's kind of like a 30-day, workout challenge or something like that. So it kind of gives people something exciting to look forward to and participate in.
Yeah, and we have some of the information published online, so I'll pull the link and I'll put that in the chat. So if people want to peek at that, they can do that.
Yeah, that would be great, Christina, because that was actually the second question for you, which was just wanting to know more about the tasks that you used for your impact challenge and getting a link to those materials, because I think that will help other people that might be planning similar activities. And also another question for you, Christina. This question is more to see if you could share a few ideas that you have for ORCID integration in your institutional repository.
Yeah, so we're a little bit tied to that right now. Our repository platform is Digital Commons, which if anybody has the Digital Commons platform, I'm sure you're very well aware that there is not an existing ORCID integration with that. So we continue to advocate for BPress to add this integration, but we're also looking for ways that we can kind of work around this a little bit. So one of the ways that we're doing that is they recently added the Scopus harvesting tool, which we advocated for them to include multiple ORCID IDs that we can basically plop a list into the harvesting tool search, and it'll return a list of ORCID IDs, all the scholarship that our faculty have published in the Scopus database, and it allows us to kind of harvest faculty type citations that way. And eventually, if we ever move to a different repository platform, then we would definitely explore ways that we can integrate the ORCID API with that platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. Okay, I've got another question, which is what strategies might be used to implement a campus-wide ORCID registration program at an institution that does not have a research information management system, such as Interfolio or Pure, especially if there is some hostility among faculty for such systems and concern that faculty might also be hostile towards the idea of either having an ORCID ID or connecting an ORCID ID with a campus-wide system like that. I'm not sure if any of our panelists have ideas on what strategies might be used to implement a campus-wide ORCID registration program somewhere that doesn't have a centralized system to keep track of information. If anyone does have ideas, feel free to pipe up. I can certainly offer my perspective from talking to multiple people at all sorts of different institutions. If your faculty, well, first of all, if you don't have a kind of a central system to keep track of research information, and if your faculty might be hostile to such a system, something that has worked well at some campuses, because sometimes there's just different cultures, and it just really kind of depends on what the general vibe is amongst faculty and researchers. But there's been success at some places where there is kind of skepticism. So if let's say your upper administration is telling everybody that they have to do something, sometimes faculty will just be skeptical of that and not do it just on principle. So in those types of situations, what we've seen work really well so far is, for example, subject specialist librarians, people that are already interacting with faculty in different departments, can just kind of start to include ORCID and kind of ease people in to help them see the benefit and value of ORCID. The fact that many publishers and increasingly funders are starting to require ORCID IDs a lot of people are going to need to have ORCID IDs, whether their employer is using ORCID or not. So that's always kind of a starting point to just start having these conversations as they might be coming up. So maybe not trying to push a centralized approach at first, but have it be more of a grassroots approach, or having maybe some sort of database in the library or in a particular unit that is using ORCID. And so kind of thinking about starting small, getting faculty in maybe a certain department to start looking at ORCID and maybe connecting their ORCID ID with a specific integration on campus. And then if those faculty can really see the benefits based on that, they can then go talk to other people. And the hope is that word will spread as kind of a grassroots approach to gain that trust and acceptance of using ORCID. But also, feel free, whoever posted that question, to, contact us, and we can consult with you based on your particular context, because while all institutions are similar in many ways, there are also unique differences that we can think about and kind of work around to help you really get the most out of ORCID based on your context. Oh, and I'm also seeing a comment. Thank you, Christina, from Christina Chan Park at Baylor University, where they have used ORCID's new affiliation manager tool. And the affiliation manager tool is basically a kind of easier way to add information to people's ORCID records without necessarily having a system like Pure that will do it for you. It's basically where you would upload a CSV file that has employment information for all of your researchers, or maybe you're just focusing on a single department at first. But basically using that to show people the benefit of ORCID by adding their affiliation to their ORCID record for them, so that they can get a sense of how it works and realize that they don't have to update their own ORCID record. The organization can do it for them as long as they give permission. So that's a really great idea. Thanks, Christina, for sharing that. And Paolo has just posted in the chat a link to the affiliation manager guide. If you want to learn more about ORCID's affiliation manager, take a look there. Let's see, are there any other questions out there? Well, if anyone does think of other questions, feel free to contact us. Our email address is there on the screen. It's orcidus@lyrasis.org. I'm also pasting that into the chat. Also, feel free to visit our website. We have lots of resources there. And if you're on Twitter, please follow us. We're at US Consortium. And we are right at the hour, so perfect timing, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And just stay tuned for the recording and the slides. We'll be sending those out to everyone shortly. And we hope to see you again at the next webinar that we do. Thanks so much, everyone.